Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to this meeting of the Perth and Kinross Integration Joint Board of Wednesday, the 4th of June 2025. I'm Councillor Colin Stewart. I'm the chair of the board. I'm joined by our chief officer, Jackie Pepper, by Jess Guild, clerk to the board for this meeting, and Donna Mitchell, who is our chief finance officer. We appear to have got rather oddly spread out, so hi Donna. I'd like to welcome to the board today in his first meeting as formally appointed Vice Chair, Brian Jones. So congratulations on your appointment, Brian. That of course means that Beth Hamilton is no longer our Vice Chair. Beth's term of office with NHS Tayside came to its conclusion. Beth had served on it for a number of years on the board, latterly as Vice Chair and as Chair of the Audit and Performance Committee. And I'd like to put on record the board's thanks to Beth Hamilton for her years of service to the board. And finally, in my part of the introductions, I'll pass over to the clerk in a moment, but I'd like to note that one of our public partners, one of the service user representatives, Sandra Auld, has been appointed to the National Care Service Interim Advisory Board. So congratulations to Sandra for that appointment as well. Clerk, could you confirm any apologies, substitutions and the further membership updates?
Thank you, Chair. We have apologies today from Sam Riddle. With regard to the membership, as you mentioned, we have Brian Jones to be appointed as Vice Chair. We have Sam Riddle, who will continue to attend as a proxy member in Beth's absence. Stuart Hope is to be reappointed as staff representative for a further 3 years. We have Dr. Daniel Smith, who is with us online, to replace Dr. Peterson as the GP representative, and Dr. Peterson will continue to attend in her role as the HSCP officer. We have Keith Russell, who will replace Susie Brown as the nurse representative. And with regard to Audit and Performance Committee, we have Heather Dunk to be appointed to replace Beth Hamilton, and we have the remaining public partner vacancy outstanding.
Was that a nod to say carry on? Thank you, Chair. As most of you know, I chair the IGB's Audit and Performance Committee, and we do have one vacancy for one of the public partners to take up. So I think we have sent out an email, perhaps, hopefully. People have received it. So far, nobody's responded, but I think it's been very helpful to have somebody on that board that isn't there already, or that committee. So if you want to ask any questions, either at the end, if we have a break, Chair, or at the end, I'm more than happy to, in fact, give you any information you might need. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor McCall. Item 2 on the agenda is declarations of interest. Do any members have any declarations of interest in items of business before us on the agenda today? Not seeing any. Okay, item 3 on the agenda is the minute of the meeting of the board of 19th of March 2025 for approval. And just to note that an update was sent out earlier in the day, just a small update to the minute, just to indicate that Nettie Sutherland had attempted to get into the meeting, but obviously there were some IT issues which were preventing you, so we've just tweaked that in the minute for you. If that's okay. Other than that, are there any? Can we agree the minute of the last meeting of the board? Thank you very much. Action points update. There were 2 items on the action points update. The first one, item 150, that was a paper which we were to have a paper on work concerning discharge without delay, and that was considered at the last meeting, so that item is considered closed. Can we remove that item? Agreed. And the next item, item 152, a presentation on Share and Care Together. We're going to see some slides on that, or a video on that. Fingers crossed that the video works, everybody. We're going to see a video on that later in the meeting today, so we'll consider that item closed and removed from the action point update as well, if that's okay. Thank you very much. Are there any matters arising from either the minute or the action point update? No. No matters arising, and so we'll move on to the substantive business before us, delivering on our strategic objectives. First of all, I would like to say that normally we would have an update from the strategic planning group in the sort of heading number 6 on the agenda. But a number of the reports, that there haven't been any meetings for the strategic planning group, but a number of the reports on the agenda before us today have already been considered by the strategic planning group. And just to add as well that the Chief Officer is looking at a refresh of the functions of the strategic planning group and how that operates. So without further ado, Chief Officer Strategic Update, this is your verbal update, Mrs. Pepper.
Thank you very much, Chair. I'm pleased to provide the IJB with a strategic, an update, a verbal update on a number of strategic matters that are not covered within the reports on this agenda and don't merit a full report. If anyone has any requests for more detailed information or a discussion on any of these, happy to follow that up after the meeting. First of all, I'd like just to give an update on our discharge without delay position. There was a report, as you've just seen on the agenda, on the 19th of March, and I'm pleased to inform members that our performance has remained relatively stable over spring months into summer and into the end of May. The National Collaborative Response and Assurance Group continues to meet weekly and is reporting overall a national decline in delays since May 2024. I think it has gone up, but it's come back down again. And the group itself is moving into a deeper focus on adults with incapacity, and that's something that we are particularly challenged with in Perth and Kinross, so that will be helpful. In terms of the number of people experiencing delay in their discharge from hospital, our rate per 100,000 has been continuously below the national target since we met in March. That target's 34.6, and we sit around 30 per 100,000. And the numbers of people experiencing delay from or within acute hospital beds has been predominantly in single figures throughout the period. And the percentages of people discharged without delay between 96 and 100% on any given day. But the hotspots that we continue to be within, to be looking at very closely, are within our community hospital provision, particularly in the south locality in Crieff and Auchterarder, and in our psychiatry of old age provision, which is, as I've just mentioned, associated with the challenges of obtaining suitable nursing home care, predominantly for people with dementia and related conditions that require enhanced care. So that's our updated position in relation to discharge without delay. In terms of the National Care Service developments, a letter was received by a wide range of stakeholders and copied to IJB members, and that letter was dated the 3rd of April from Marie Todd, the Minister of Health and Social Care and Wellbeing, advising of the Scottish Government's ongoing commitment to publishing the National Care Service Charter of Rights. That charter will lay out the rights of people accessing community health and social care and will be co-designed with stakeholders and provide a clear pathway to make a complaint if those rights are not upheld. So the Minister indicated that the Charter can still be published without a statutory obligation to do so, and sought support from this. And as the Chair mentioned, we're delighted that Sandra Auld is represented on the Interim Advisory Board and that we can continue to be connected closely with that work. There's a current Scottish Government consultation on long-term health conditions, and the Scottish Government is seeking the views of a wide range of people, and that's individuals experiencing long-term health conditions and organisations which support them. And that consultation will close on the 20th of July, and it's proposed that the Health and Social Care Partnership prepares a response to that consultation, and in doing so we'll seek the views of IGB members ahead of that and Strategic Planning Group members in its preparation. So we'll be in touch with the arrangements for that in due course. And also there was correspondence issued to the Cabinet Secretary for Health and Social Care via the IGB Chair and Vice Chairs Network and the Health and Social Care Partnership Chief Officers Network. A letter was issued to the Cabinet Secretary on the 21st of May regarding the financial challenges faced by integration joint boards, and much of that is referenced in one of the reports on the agenda. Later, with the Accounts Commission report also referenced. And the letter describes substantial financial shortfalls nationally and the increasing risks to delivering current services and ability to reform through a shift in the balance of care to community-based health and care services. So the letter also highlighted that most IGBs now hold no contingency reserves, and that heightens the financial risk that will have to be managed with partners. I also took part in a Scottish Government COSLA Systems Leaders Stock Take event on the 12th of May, which was focused on the Coming Home implementation plan. And that was, I attended on behalf of Health and Social Care Scotland and the NHS Teesside Chief Executive. And in that event, we were able to hear directly from the Scottish Human Rights Commission on monitoring compliance with Article 9, which is the right to independent living, and a framework for action planning. And there was an exploration of what that means in providing services which deinstitutionalise or delivered in a deinstitutionalised way, and an intent to monitor that independently along with people with a disability. So there was an appraisal of the National Coming Home Action Plan and a review of the national data, and some of which is referenced in a report later on the agenda as well, the Dynamic Support Register as a tool to monitor and plan progress. So there was consensus that the current situation nationally is not acceptable, with suggestions being put forward in relation to funding for both capital and lifelong support for those individuals who are currently experiencing long-term delays in institutional care. And also finally, just to say that members will be aware of the involvement of the Health and Social Care Partnership in securing replacement general medical services for patients registered with the CARS medical practice from mid-September. And I'd like to commend officers in the primary care team and in finance who've been working tirelessly on options to secure the future provision in this area. And members will now be aware that we have set a date for an extraordinary meeting, and that's been scheduled for the 20th of June to allow the IGB to consider and comment on options ahead of the consideration of that by NHS Teesside, which should be set for the 26th of June, which is an NHS Teesside board meeting. It's a tight timescale, but we've devised that to ensure that there is as much lead-in time as possible for any new arrangements to take hold. So thank you for agreeing to take part in the extraordinary meeting. Thank you.
Thank you, Chief Officer, and just to add my thanks to well, the people in the room are Hamish and Sal, but I know that there's a team of people behind assisting with the securing of the continuing primary care provision in the Curse. Are there any questions for the Chief Officer, Mr. Black?
Thanks, Jackie, for that. The National Care Service, are they not supposed to report back before the summer holidays? Somebody's supposed to be reporting back before the summer holidays. I'm not sure if it's.
I'm not sure who you're referring to, Martin. It would be helpful to know. Oh, right, okay, right, pick it up later.
The second question that, okay, you've written about there's no reserves left across Scotland. So the partners, obviously, we're fully aware of that because they now need to add that to the risk register because they're actually going to be funding any shortfalls. And we need to know the significance of the shortfalls that they're going to have to be funding and whether they're willing to take these shortfalls.
No, thank you very much for that. Really just to give assurance that you'll know that the strategic risk register for the IJB contains a risk around our finance and that we are engaged in regular and ongoing discussions with both NHS Tayside, Director of Finance and the strategic lead for finance within the council. But the point about sharing elements of that risk with our partners is very well made and something I'll ask Donna to comment on. She just agrees, yeah. Or don't just agree, you agree.
Thanks very much. Are there any more questions for the Chief Officer on verbal update? Not seeing any. So the next item on the agenda then, 6.2, is the Tayside Mental Health Services strategic update on the Mental Health and Learning Disability Whole System Change Programme. Chief Officer.
Thank you very much, Chair. I recognise that there's considerable information in this report and the appendix, but very succinctly just to say that this report relates to the Whole System Change Programme and is provided as part of an agreed schedule of progress updates. And similar information is provided to Angus and Dundee IJBs and to NHS Tayside. The IJB is asked to note progress to May 2025 and the key points of note are that there have continued to be regular meetings of the programme board overseeing the change programme. There has been a review of the resource requirements to align with those areas which require a renewed focus in learning disability in particular and to align with the priority to move to implementation of a new model of care for adult mental health and with recruitment underway for those positions. So the draft model of care has been co-produced by the Model of Care Steering Group and the core components of that are set out in this report and that's derived from a much larger document that sets out the detail of that. It's been developed with significant representation of lived experience and stakeholders and following a programme of consultation engagement that will begin over the summer and we hope to bring back a final model for IJB approval at the turn of the year and at the latest early into 2026. And you'll know that the timeframe that was set out for that was March 2026 in the original Whole System Change Programme. And on today's agenda, we also have an update on the strategic direction for mental health services across our Perth and Kinross communities, which Jane Menzies will introduce and provide a presentation on that. And we will share a video of the Share and Care Together work. And so members will see that there is a very intentional and close alignment of the work being taken forward locally with the Whole System Change Programme. So hopefully this is the first time where you begin to see that alignment and coming together. And it may be something that we want to spend some time in a development session in a bit more detail to enable people to see and understand how that will work in practice. Also appended in the report is a second quarterly report for the Learning Disability Inpatient Transition Programme, setting out the progress to March. And there's been a bit of an issue in terms of the synchronising of IJB meetings across Tayside. So it's coming late to Perth and Kinross in the sense that this is the March report, and a June report is currently in the final stages of preparation but not available for this meeting today. And I will share that with IJB members via separate briefing once that's finalised over the next few weeks. And just for your awareness today, the report will outline that the formal organisational change processes are commencing for NHS staff. And as a result of that, there is likely to be a rephasing of the time frame to allow that to complete. But happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Chief Officer. Are there any questions on the whole system mental health and learning disability change programme? Mr. Black.
Probably on that, but it's probably on a lot of things that's going to start to come through in reports, and that is lived experience. Can we have a definition of lived experience that across is going to cover quite a lot of things? Because my experience and somebody else living experience that may be quite significant, and so we need to have some form because it's becoming a buzzword now with the experiences opposed to an actual what is it about. And secondly, quickly, it says that the EQA, which I thought was brilliant, is to be reviewed in August 2025. I'm too pleased what I've loved the experience.
Thank you very much, Martin. And in terms, I suppose that phrase lived experience is something that's been used more and more. But I suppose the intention behind the work that we're doing is to ensure that we have as many voices involved in this and as many varied experiences, because everyone's going to be different and everyone has different needs. So some of the work that Share and Care Together have been doing is trying to expand that and make sure that we've got as many people involved in the work as possible. And hopefully you'll see that coming through in a very, very short clip later. So a definition is something that I don't think we've outlined in any of these reports so far, but it might be something we want to think about. But it would cover people who have direct experience of the services that we're talking about here, but also those that are caring for them and supporting them.
I would agree on the definition or the attempt at definition, but somebody's lived experience at 2 months and 10 months, completely different.
Thank you. Mrs. Summers.
Yes, I just wondered, because this is, across Tayside, will all IGBs have a meeting to give feedback at the same time, or will it depend on when the meetings are across Tayside? Who gets the information first?
It's a good question, Maureen, and something that I will take away and discuss with the other chief officers, because if there's actually a very critical point at which we're making a decision to approve a model of care at the turn of the year, it would make sense for that to be either a super IJB meeting or something that happens in very quick succession. But I think for me at the moment is the preparation for that and ensuring that IJB members are able to explore in detail with those who are the authors of this and those people who will implement that, and they have a really good understanding before we get to that point. So leave that one with me. I think it's a really good suggestion and something to pick up with the chairs and vice chairs across Tayside. You may have a view on that as well.
Yeah, just to say that when we were considering the timetable for the IJB meetings, we've aligned the 3 IJBs in terms of meetings so that they're all happening in the same month. So any decisions that require to be taken by all 3 IJBs will at least be done within a 4-week period. But as you say, or as the Chief Officer says, if there's a different way of doing that, we can explore that. But the most important thing would be to get the buy-in beforehand, and so that we're not presented with something that's a surprise that we as board members don't like, and we're 3 different IJBs are trying to change it in the same month. But we would need to make sure that we had the buy-in beforehand. Are there any other questions for the Chief Officer? Not seeing any. No comment. Any comments on the report? It's Dunk.
Thanks very much. I thought it was really good to read what the principles will be going forward, Jackie, and that was really helpful. I suppose my question relates to the point that's up front in the report that talks about future planning should extend beyond service provision and place a focus on prevention. And I just wondered where the focus was on prevention with regards to young people, because there's a link in the paper that talks about the key principles and joint working with children and young people services. But I wondered where that was with regards to the link to education and how we're making sure it's integrated within our schools provision, so that we're trying to enable that prevention strategy to actually be focused on in schools as well as other services.
Don't want to put Jane on the spot, but I think this is something that's actually going to be quite critical at a local level, because if we think about local authority education services, they're operating within each of the local authority areas, but the focus on prevention is something that we really need to think about in terms of that financial framework that needs to follow this, which is about how do we ensure that we've got our resources in focused at the right level. So yes, it's something that we'll be considering very closely.
I would just like to say that about 30 years ago, I had 2 family members who were experiencing mental health problems about a year apart, and one of them had to wait 3 years before they actually got, an intervention, just because they were supposed to present themselves. They wouldn't listen to a relative, and that was a big barrier at that time, And the other one had early intervention, and I must say that the outcomes, the long-term outcomes, are a world apart, so it is really important. And I used to talk back then about early intervention and going into schools, and they said, but children that are still at school don't really present with mental health problems now. They're older, they're about in their late teens before they develop mental health problems. And it was more or less dismissed. But I'm glad to say that 30 years on, there is a more understanding of mental health, and I think they are in schools, but they can't get enough of that. They've got to get in and talk to children when they're young and make them aware of what's happening to them.
Thanks, Maureen. I think it's really good to have that feedback, and I don't want to steal Jane's thunder, but the model that Jane's going to talk through really is very much about being for people to be able to self-refer and to get to the right place as quickly as possible, because some of that might need very specialist support and some of it might need less specialist support. So we need to be able to address all of that.
We just add to that self-refer is okay, but if the person is too far advanced in their mental health, crisis, they won't help them. They stay as far away from the services as they can, So there has to be some sort of other way of identifying them, because there's a lot out in the community there that, won't present and they need help.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to come to Mr. Russell next, and welcome back to the Integration Joint Board. Just to say for those online, because this is a live broadcast meeting, there isn't the raise hand function that you sometimes see in Microsoft Teams chats. So if you put either a Q or a C for question or comment in the chat, that'll just attract my attention. So sorry that facility isn't available in this type of meeting. But over to you, Mr. Russell, for a question.
Thank you, Councillor Stewart. Firstly, I fully agree with the points made around the importance of early intervention. There's a really good example elsewhere in Tayside as part of a national Pathfinder project around early intervention and psychosis, and the clear impact and positive benefits that's having for people in contact with that service. My question, Jackie, is again, I fully agree around the importance of ensuring an alignment between local strategic planning in the partnership and the development of a model of care. That synergy is not immediately apparent in the two sets of papers that are available at this meeting, and I'm just wondering how you envisage that work going forward so that clear connection is explicitly made.
I couldn't agree more, Keith, and it's something that we're working on, and especially trying to present that in a visual way so that people can see that this is actually we're all working and facing in the right direction, and supporting clear and supportive pathways throughout that person's journey backwards and forwards, or whatever that might be. So that's something we were aware of in the presentation of this, and but I suppose really just to say here and to assure you and everyone else that that's very much what's behind the work that we're taking forward. So we need to see that coming together. So once we've got to the stage of approving that model of care, I think that needs to be where we're seeing the two come together, because we're actually going into some consultation that has to bring that together, Keith, so that we're actually hearing the voices of people or stakeholders or whoever we're speaking to that see that whole journey, that it's one and the same thing.
Thanks, Stuart. Is it okay to come back?
Sure.
Thank you, Jackie. Again, fully agree with the importance and the direction that you're setting out there, because both can inform each other in terms of what good local mental health services need to look like for Perth and Kinross, but also how they work to deliver locally and nationally agreed standards around, for example, the quality standards for adult mental health services. As an example of something that we want our adult mental health services to be able to deliver an evidence irrespective of what part of Tayside the service is being delivered in. So thank you, and I'm very assured by the direction of travel you're setting out.
Thank you. Are there any other questions or comments? Dr. Dawn.
Thank you. I guess just I've got a bit of a conflict of interest because I manage the CAM service for NHS Tayside, but I think just for assurance, there's the TRIC group, which is called the Tayside Regional Improvement Collaborative, which all of our 3 local authority areas sit on, along with NHS Tayside, and Public Health are with us there too. So just to give an assurance that there is a lot of work going on in that children's space alongside mental health about early intervention and how we provide that and redesign the pathway of care so that we're using that GIRFEC model, getting it right for every child and making sure that those early interventions are in place and they're going to the right place for that support and intervention.
Okay, thank you. And just to be clear, I don't consider that a conflict of interest if you're bringing your professional expertise to the board. Thank you, Dr. Doyle. Any more questions or comments on the report? Councillor McCall.
Thank you, Chair. It's just a comment, really. I mean, I think there was reference made to very often children or young people are beyond school, and certainly adult protection is very aware of a lot of those issues of what happens when children between the age of 16 and maybe 25, that there are mechanisms that need to be put in place, because very often that's when people realise they need help or they, outside the school environment. So I think that's an active agenda on that particular forum as well, and that's a multi-agency body as well. So I think it's been picked up in a number of places, but there's lots of people who sit around this table that also sit on that committee as well.
Okay, thank you. I'm not seeing any more Q's or C's in the chat or any more hands up in the room. So can we agree to note the updated position and the high level progress update on the mental health and learning disability change programme? Thank you very much. We'll move on to item 6.3 on the agenda, which is going to be introduced by Jane Menzies, our Head of Adult Health and Social Care, and this is the Perth and Kinross Community Mental Health and Wellbeing Strategic Plan update. Jane.
Thank you, Chair. My intention is to provide a very brief introduction and to move on to a very short presentation that will accompany the paper. So by way of introduction, just to say that following the end of our current mental health and wellbeing strategy for Perth and Kinross, this paper outlines our intentions moving forward. So it provides an early draft new model of care and also strengthens our wider responsibilities in terms of mental health and wellbeing. For individuals, for communities, and ultimately to improve population mental health. So the aim is really one of continual improvement, taking the actions forward over the last few years, where we can seek new opportunities for greater collaboration and place, as we've discussed, real emphasis on prevention. In relation to the model of care, I can offer assurance that we are very much part of that process. We are working to ensure that the role of health and social care partnerships is positioned strongly within the paper, and we will absolutely seek to adhere to the details once they've been confirmed by the Tayside approach. So if I can move to the presentation, please, which is just going to offer a hopefully succinct summary in terms of our current challenges, our key areas of focus and the process that we will use to get there. Can I check if people can see the... Could we move to the first page of the presentation with the boxes, please, and just check it's accessible? Oh, thank you, Phil. Yeah, thank you very much. Thank you. So this really outlines the overarching themes. So the first is, as the IJB will be aware, we are seeing increasing numbers of people with mental health issues. Now, this is across all levels of service. This is across all sectors. It's experienced very much by mental health community services and, of course, by primary care colleagues. Now, this means that we are still seeing comparatively high numbers of people still requiring hospitalisation, and also a high percentage of the total population accessing services that are escalating into clinical teams. Now, the easiest way I can define that is by saying teams led by our NHS colleagues and overseen by consultant psychiatrists. Now, there are many people who require to be expedited to these services actually quite appropriately, and that's what the level of their health requires. However, when we see some of the numbers within our community mental health teams within Perth and Kinross, it can also be a sign that the wider services are not as robust as they could be to provide people that earlier intervention. So to that end, a real focus for us will be prevention and early intervention. We'll be looking at proportionate services which are easily accessible and available to people when they experience difficulty. Now, in order to achieve this, we will require to progress with a systems approach. This is not something that we can achieve in isolation. So collaboration will be absolutely essential if we are to see the positive change moving forward. And that, again, is a principle that we've already addressed this afternoon within the meeting. It's also no secret that we, in the face of growing demand within the Health and Social Care Partnership, we are also dealing with limited resources. So working in this way provides the additional assurance that we can be as efficient as possible, as effective as possible, and we will strive to be as evidence-based as possible, which means that any investment is very clearly linked to illustrated need. So the aim for this strategy is quite simply is a long-term or sustainable service that will always strive to achieve the best outcomes for individuals. The next slide, please. So when we move on to the development strategy that's being addressed within the paper, now clearly we will build on improvement to date. So for example, great work that's happened within primary mental health services will continue to both be there and be supported, and we will seek to enhance some of those initiatives. We will look to enable people to remain mentally well by providing care and support earlier in the way that they need it. And we will do this by strengthening what we would call the sort of mild to moderate mental health tier, facilitating self-referral and looking at how people can easily get access to in-person or digital support. And we will bring services together so that they are more sustainable. Now, this is particularly important to promote both independence, but to provide people with the tools they need to prevent issues from getting worse. We will aim to simplify service access and improve pathways. So we will strive to create a single point of access for all mental health services, and that will be across sectors. There will be easier movement between services. So if someone's health deteriorates, we'll be able to move them to the most appropriate service more quickly. Equally, if their health improves, we can move to the more appropriate support more quickly. We'll place a greater emphasis on prevention and early intervention, and we will do this by working particularly closely with our peers within the third sector and within the planning agenda, community planning agenda. Now, you'll know that one of the key strengths within the third sector is that they are very skilled at embedding themselves in local communities, and it's very important to achieve the outcomes that we need, that services are delivered as close to a person's home as possible. Now, with regards to the community planning agenda, there are early initiatives underway where we are looking to strengthen our working with housing, children's services, environmental services, looking at the principles of community empowerment and leadership so communities can take greater ownership over the outcomes they want to achieve. And of course, partners such as police and education. So what we will be seeking to build over the next few years is a single coordinated vision and effort to improve mental health and wellbeing across Perth and Kinross. Now, from a partnership perspective, which you will know is also outlined in legislation, we will be moving at pace to integrate services to support this model of care. So we will bring together into single teams health and social care workforces into that single coordinated whole, which means again is that using the principle of integration, we can provide services which are fully integrated and clearly coordinated at the point of delivery to individuals within their communities. A key principle of the Tayside model of care, and of course for Perth and Kinross, is the recognition that where people experience both mental health and substance misuse issues at the same time, that can be incredibly challenging for them to access the services they need in a simple and coordinated way. So to that end, we will, within the model, remove the boundaries between mental health and substance use services so that we can provide that more coordinated response. Now, that's not to say, of course, that the greater the difficulty someone is experiencing, that specialised services are not the right place for them, but where that is not required, we would hope to deliver it in a more effective way. And ultimately, this will allow us to create a system where evidence drives resource. So the single point of access across all sectors will allow us to gather, to analyse and ultimately respond to real life data in terms of the needs for mental health issues within Perth and Kinross. Could we move on to the next slide, please? So just by way of the next steps, first of all, to let people know that we're working closely with the Tayside model of care, and the principles within that will be absorbed into practice within Perth and Kinross. And an early presentation which was supported was presented to the strategic planning group for their thoughts, ideas and suggestions in March of this year. So over the next period, we will look to consult and engage, and then the task will become one of looking at the Tayside requirements, but also ensuring at all times that we satisfy the needs as we know them of the citizens of Perth and Kinross. We will, of course, have focused discussions with key partners. So, for example, primary care, individuals who have used services, the workforce themselves, and wider partners who will influence our ability to succeed in this agenda. We'll absolutely have a key focus on issues of equality and diversity. There's no point developing services that aren't accessible to absolutely everyone, and particularly people who are at risk of being marginalised. So to that end, we will look at issues of rurality, race, gender, age, etc., to make sure that this is fit for purpose. And a sort of service issue, which I think is particularly important for us, is that as we progress, we need to make sure that we benchmark where we are at the moment, what we're succeeding in, what we're challenged by, and what we understand is required, because without that, as we move forward, we have no measure to know whether or not what we're doing is successful and to adjust our actions accordingly. So with all this in mind, our timeline is the same as the wider model of care, which is the aim of implementing the new approach by December 2015, by which time we will have all required principles at our disposal to make a final decision. And then, of course, our requirement will be to continue to monitor and evaluate on a continual basis and make sure that we continue to provide the best. And that's it. Thank you very much. And I'm happy to take any questions.
I think we were also going to take this opportunity to share the video, if that's possible, for our committee colleagues.
Okay, thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Apologies for that interruption. We're not going to try playing another video during the live meeting. So as I said, we will circulate the Share and Care Together video by email following the meeting. Jane Menzies had just finished her introduction to the Community Mental Health and Wellbeing Strategic Plan Update report and the presentation that accompanied that. So are there any questions or comments on the report? Councillor Michelle Frampton first.
Thank you, and thanks, Jane, for the report. My question is on accessing vital mental health services through self-referral. How can we effectively raise awareness among the general public in Perth and Kinross about the option of self-referral to mental health services so that we can effectively create a culture of understanding, reducing stigma and ensuring that people know where to go and how to access services?
Thank you for the question. I think that's an incredibly important question. The single point of access will be available, as I said, across sectors. So we'll have to come up with a unified communication plan to make sure that that's well understood. As we progress through the strategy, that's something that will have to be developed, and I'm happy to bring it back if requested.
Thank you.
Councillor McCall.
Thank you. I have a question in multiple parts, if I may. I think the first question really is around, you mentioned things like housing and education, environment, and also poverty, and I'm wondering how well aligned we will be with Perth and Kinross Council and their strategic priorities in those areas. I know there's a lot of work going on to reduce poverty, which is also a contributor to mental health challenges, and where the role of the Community Planning Partnership fits into all of that, not just within Perth and Kinross Council, but within the Health Board as well. You know, I know a few people will know that have concerns about the CPPs not having an easy path up to them or back out from them again. So I think it's really important that that works. My other question is really around about prevention. I know that, Martin, I've lived experience in this area, so I know that people with certain learning disabilities, for example, Down syndrome, develop things like depression from about the age of 20, much younger than the general population. And the percentage of people with depression once they reach the age of 40 and above is much higher than the general population. This, as far as I'm aware, is a well-established fact. And I'm sure there are other categories or cohorts who fall into similar types of patterns. So how can we build in some prevention? It might be something how we align with what Jackie work is doing, so that we can think about, we know this is likely to happen, how do we do the prevention in advance? And the other one, in a sort of similar vein, is for young people who are in school with additional support needs. In fact, some in receipt of disability living allowance for young for young people. That, and I know this is from casework, that very often when people leave school, they're out in the community, and they don't have that structure of support around them from school into mainstream society. How do we think ahead to support those young people make that transition, particularly in relation to their mental health? That's it.
Okay, thank you. I'll try and address those one by one. Please tell me if I've misunderstood any. So first of all, in terms of alignment with the council priorities, we're well embedded into the work streams. And in fact, we have strategic leadership responsibilities that align to the council priorities. So I would say, in terms of the areas you mentioned, we work closely with strategic leads, and we attend the strategic planning group. So I would hope the alignment is very positive. In terms of community planning, we have a community planning subgroup. Please keep me right, Chief Officer. In terms of the health and wellbeing subgroup, thank you for the community planning partnership. And this is the focus we're using to ensure that partners get together and are able to progress the themes that we've outlined today. In terms of children or young adults with learning disabilities or autism, and where their mental health needs become apparent, I think this is an area that certainly for the partnership we have some work to do. So the new strategy looking at for individuals with learning disability and neurodiversity, which is next on the agenda, a key theme we've agreed on that is not only service provision and how we can provide a better response to these individuals, but crucially, how we can embed those principles across the work of the partnership. So it's not specific to that work stream or strategy, it's a responsibility we have across all of our activity. So that is something which is progressing, but I do recognise requires some focus. In terms of transition, broadly speaking, Aaron, is it okay if I pass over to you? Oh.
Thanks, Jane. So I suppose it is quite opportune in terms of wearing my other hat in terms of strategically for children, families and justice, in that the mental health strategy for children and young people has also come to an end as well. So we're taking an opportunity to actually undertake a whole system strategic needs assessment, looking at a whole family approach, but recognising that the adult strategy, while standing alone, will share the same principles that we will have across the whole age range. We are acutely aware that transitions can be quite problematic, just as you've highlighted there, particularly leaving school to accessing adult services. And what we will be doing is looking at our children's strategy to make sure it dovetails in with the adult one. And where there's opportunity, I think, for close collaboration or for joint groups to be established to look at the same issues, then we will look to do that. So that's clearly part of our plan, to tie up the two strategies to make sure that they've got the same principles.
Yeah, I think that's really important, Aaron, because very often, and again, I'm relying to some extent on casework, you know, young people leave school at say 16, that they would have had additional support in school. They might have had like child DLA, and then there might be a time elapsed before they can't cope, or they have mental health issues. So we need to think about, it's not necessarily they go from one to the other and they access the services immediately, because sometimes that need isn't identified or acknowledged, and perhaps the need that they had in school is identified as a school only need. So I think we need to just make sure that we have that transition almost in a sort of elongated timeline, and not just the individuals, but also their families as well, who very often don't know where to turn to except to their local counsellor, and we're not always necessarily able to help them as much as we'd like to. Thank you.
I think that's a really helpful observation, and something that we'll keenly pay attention to as part of our development. And I think there's probably a piece of work that we can do with our education colleagues who have the ASM provisions within their establishments, about making sure that we're providing families and young people with all the information before they leave school, in terms of accessing ongoing support as well. And you're right, sometimes it isn't immediate. It could be 3, 6, 9, 12 months after they've left school, and longer as well. No, so thank you for that.
Councillor Illingworth.
Great, thank you. Jane, you put at the very start of your report that there are lots of successes and there are some ways that you could do it better. Can you give us some example of successes and ways you can think you can do things better?
Some of this, of course, was prior to my arrival, but there was particularly a great deal of work around the provision of mental health services within primary care, where they worked very much with primary care colleagues to look at how they could provide that support at the earliest opportunity. And that was absolutely crucial in terms of strengthening that relationship. We do have some areas of service which have undergone some integration activity and certainly provide more coordinated services as a result. But what we're really keen to do is take that next step and essentially create a single integrated service, which means that we can use resources more effectively, and it will be significantly easier for people using services to navigate. So that's what I mean by building on activity thus far.
And Ms. Black.
Thank you very much, Jane. I thought it was an excellent report. There are a couple of things that while you've put evidence will drive resource, which I think is a great thing. How do we start off? Because at the beginning of the slides, you said there's a significant increase in people clinically coming in, and then we went on to prevention. Do we have maybe the 3 to 5 priorities that we're going to throw prevention at? Have they been identified?
Sorry. The Tayside model of care work is very much looking at the standards, processes and pathways for people who require, for lack of a better term, clinical support, and that's absolutely essential. And we will align with that completely. When I'm talking more about preventative services, so areas that we're particularly looking at is, one, the ability for people to access that support themselves if they are able, and that's the self-referral aspect. Secondly is to break down some of the barriers in the pathways. So for example, if we have 10 services or 10 teams, there will be rules as to who can refer to whom, and that can cause real issues. Now, it was all done for the best of intentions to sort of help control flow, as it were, so services don't struggle. But actually what it can mean is that where, for example, a third sector partner is experiencing a challenge with an individual, they're trying to provide the best support for them, they have to go through a few steps to get there. So one of the things that during consultation will be to understand barriers that are there for the best of reasons and those that can be removed. Some of the areas for prevention that we've been looking at is one, physical presence. So working closely with some of our third sector peers to look at that physical presence, somewhere where someone practically or tangibly can go. Looking at resources such as some of the digital mental health supports, but deliver those with in-person support. So I think but I can't remember. I'm going to look at Hamish here for one moment because I can't remember what NICE stands for. Clinical Excellence, National Institute. Thank you very much. And they would provide us with guidance in terms of mental health digital tools that they recognise as being evidence-based. And there's a good number, I think about 8. So we could look at those, which oddly traditionally aren't used that much in mental health services. CBT, cognitive behavioural therapy based interventions, have a very good evidence base too, and counselling is often frequently used, and it would be great to look at peer support networks, so support to a degree by people who have been through that themselves. So yes, we need to firm these things up, but we're very clear in terms of what is recognised, what is best practice, and what is going to work.
Thank you. Mr. Russell online.
Thank you. I would absolutely agree with that question around priorities for early intervention and prevention. And again, I would just make reference to early intervention in psychosis, which has a international evidence base around the positive outcomes early intervention delivers for people who have an at-risk mental state or are at risk of developing a psychotic illness, in terms of the individual's social, employment, family recovery, but also the wider impact it has in terms of savings across the health and social care system by reducing the length of time that someone has an untreated illness for, and significantly reduce the likelihood of further contact with services into later life. So I would absolutely advocate for early intervention in psychosis as being one of the key priorities for early intervention in Perth and Kinross and Tayside more widely. And it is referenced in the model of care. So I suppose, Jane, again, it's a question about how do we ensure that orientation towards early intervention in psychosis as a priority for intervention in Perth and Kinross?
Well, by continuing to work alongside colleagues that are developing the Tayside model, and when that's completed, we most certainly can take those areas on board. I think one thing that reminded me of, which is absolutely key to mention, is prevention isn't always about interventions or support at the earlier stage. It's also a principle that should be inherent in all of our activity, the way that we deliver services, the way that we express ourselves, the way we support people who access the care that we provide. So yeah, thank you.
Would I be able just to come back? I don't disagree with that, Jane, but actually where there's a very strong, robust evidence base that this form of early intervention and prevention works for the individual, for wider society and for health and social care, then I think we've got to go where the evidence points to, and absolutely again advocating for early intervention in psychosis as being one of the areas to focus on within Perth and Kinross.
Thanks, Mr. Russell. Mrs. Summers.
So I'd just like to backtrack a wee bit to where you said that you're going to be removing the barriers between, mental health and substance misuse. I think that's a great move, because a lot of people with mental health, as most people know, will use substances, to deal with how they're feeling, so it shouldn't be used as something to prevent them from getting treatment at the time, which has happened, it should be seen as that's part of who they are, part of, where they're coming from, so.
Okay, thank you. And that leads very nicely, Mrs. Summerson, to my question, or my first question, which is in terms of absolutely agree with Maureen that we want to see these barriers between the different modes of treatment broken down. But as Maureen says, that obviously there are an awful lot of people with comorbidities or multiple issues there. But just in terms of breaking those barriers down, I wonder if you could give us a practical example. What are some of the barriers that exist between, or the boundaries that exist between community mental health treatment and substance abuse treatment?
What quite often happens is that a mental health assessment is difficult to take forward when someone is under the influence of drugs or alcohol. And then equally, the converse of that can also be true. So what tends to happen sometimes is that there can be the risk, although everyone tries their best to avoid it, of a sort of delay in treatment. So if we were to progress services in tandem, then that multidisciplinary decision can be made about how best and in what form that care can be provided. So it's just essentially a matter of coordination.
Thanks very much. And looking around for any more hands, or I'll go on to my second question. So just in the programme timelines section of the paper, where we're talking about the community engagement team progressing external consultation with key stakeholders and those with lived experience from May to July 2025. And in your presentation, it just said June on its own. I was wondering what is that a start in June? What are the actual timelines? Have we already started? When will we be finishing? And also, will it be will we be targeting sort of key existing known lived experience groups, or will it be a wider public consultation with the opportunity for people who may, or for the public to contribute? And will we be looking to do sort of outreach to actively engage people who would otherwise be difficult to reach?
So we're being supported in this by one of the parties is the community engagement team, and they will absolutely place a focus on trying to get feedback from people, as I said, who are at risk of being marginalised. Quite often the best way for us to access that is through smaller third sector organisations that work in the different localities, so that would absolutely be key. The consultation timeframe is, broadly speaking, that you outlined, but there are certain groups obviously that we need to talk to, and we need to be sure that we're in receipt of all information, and we need the model of care for Tayside to be to sort of reach its next iteration as well. So I think it would be challenging to provide a certain date, because my concern would be more that I fulfilled the function to best effect. Yeah.
Thank you. And just on the point about whether there was any public consultation or whether it was targeted.
My apologies. Yeah, I think there's going to have to be a degree of public consultation. Yeah, apologies.
Chief Officer, you want to come in too?
And I think what we need to define is how we bring this together. in terms of the model of care work for Tayside and the local work, because we're talking to the same people. And it's a shame that we didn't see the Share and Care Together video, because they're going to be doing a series of summer connection events. They've got a programme of activity really just to expand that network of contacts. So the trick will be to bring this together so that we're not doing this in parallel. It has to be absolutely in alignment, so that we get the messages right. Thanks.
Thank you. And Mr. Black, you want to come back in?
Come back and that breaking down the barriers. I worked with somebody for over 20 years who couldn't stay sober any more than 3 months. And when she went to mental health because they were drinking, no, you can't get an assessment. And that continually went on, costing money for hospitals, work, different stuff like that. She finally got an assessment, a PTSD, borderline personality disorder, and then went through a chemotherapy scheme and has now been sober 2.5 years. So that was 17.5 years putting people in and out of hospitals because of the barriers that were there.
Okay. If there's no more questions or comments, let's give it a second for anybody online. Okay, then. Thank you very much. Can we note the service improvement intentions for the Health and Social Care Partnership, mental health services, and the aim to strengthen our approach to community mental well-being, and acknowledge the development of a new mental health and well-being strategy for 2025 onwards? Agreed. Thank you very much. And our third paper on mental health and learning disability this afternoon is the Autism and Learning Disabilities Strategic Delivery Plan Update. This report is being introduced by Gillian Morrison, who I think is joining us online, the Partnership's Interim Service Manager for Learning Disabilities. Gillian, if you're there, over to you.
Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for allowing me to come along and talk about our Learning Disabilities and Autism Strategic Delivery Plan as it comes to its end. So it's been going over the last 3 years. Today's report just provides you with an overview of the large amount of work which has been undertaken to deliver community supports, which is enabling people with a learning disability and autism to live as independently as possible within their own homes, to allow them to live better lives while ensuring that they are socially included, but also taking into account to address the health inequality. So it's an overview of the work that we've been doing over the last 3 years, and particularly in the last 12 months. And this work meets the ambitions of the Coming Home report, which enables those with a learning disability who have been in long stay hospital and institutional care to move back into community settings within their own communities. So that's been really a huge focus around the work we're doing to enable those who have been in long stay hospital, particularly to work towards enabling them to live back in the community. So I wanted to kind of highlight some of the work that we have been doing over the last 12 months, particularly around our multidisciplinary team scope that works specifically with those with complex needs around learning disabilities and or autism. And I'm delighted to say that we've been fully staffed over in the last sort of 6 to 9 months. We've been able to fill the posts that were outstanding, particularly around our specialist OT, which has been a great asset to the team, particularly around that work of supporting people into their own homes. We currently, or back in February 2025, when it did the last sort of numbers of how many people were supporting, we had 367 clients and carers who we were supporting, which is an increase of 8% over from the previous year, which I think evidenced quite clearly the ongoing demand to support this particular client group around complex needs. Some of the other work we've been doing is around that transitioning into adult life, and doing that through a multidisciplinary approach, which is demonstrated through the graph on page 2 of the report. It's about looking at how we increase the disabilities working through the transition, so ensuring that people have got a positive pathway and journey from moving on from school into adult life, which can often be quite daunting both for the young person and their families and carers. And through that we introduced the offer of our family group decision making coordinator to be part of that transition process, so very much looking about a strengths-based approach and ensuring the voices of the young people and their families and carers are in part of that, as part of that journey. So we've seen that as really important. Also looking at the work we've been doing around the Coming Home report and supporting our individuals out of long stay hospital. We're looking at currently working with 4 people who are currently in hospital, with 2 of them currently in transition. So we have clear plans, we're working towards those plans, and again working that multidisciplinary way, both around the community team, but also with our inpatient service as well, to have clear and robust transition plans in place to support those individuals. We've also commenced work with the other 2 individuals. One, we're currently looking at the recruitment of the care provider, and then we'll be able to work towards the transition plan for that individual, and also the other individual we're working to look at who would be the best provider for that. So there's clear positive work going on to support those individuals who in some instances have been in hospital for over a decade. We did support 1 individual out of hospital last year, and that was in April 2024, and they've been successfully living in the community over the last 12, 13 months, which has been really positive. We can also see the work through our multidisciplinary work of around being able to reduce the number of people that we've got on our dynamic support register, which is the register that we report back to Scottish Government on around the Coming Home report and how we're achieving the outcomes from the implementation. We continue to work in partnership across all aspects, and particularly around with our housing colleagues, which are essential in being able to support people to live in the community. And we've got our independent living panel, which we jointly chair with housing to support individuals. And through over the past 2.5 years of the strategic housing plan, the independent living panel has enabled 6 people with supported accommodation needs to move into their own properties, including those in our core and cluster projects. And Appendix 1, which we have, is given a few of the testimonies of people who have moved into the community and the positive impact that's had on their lives since doing so. But we want to improve the inclusion further by working with communities to make it more accessible for all. So not just looking around at our statutory services of the opportunities, which are very important, but we also want to look at how we can enable people to access their own local groups and making them accessible, so to improve that social inclusion. So it's not just about people being in the community, but being part of the community is really important. And it's important to hear the voices of those with lived experience, and we've looked at through the work that we've done with the joining in together for good life, and through the development of Hear Our Roar. It demonstrates our commitment of Perth and Kinross in providing the opportunity for those voices to be heard, and to have a true and meaningful impact in how we deliver and what services we deliver moving forward. So it's really about, it's not about engagement, it's about how do we co-produce going forward. Looking at, apologies. So access to employment is also important, and particularly we did a piece of work with PAS, with Perth Autism Support, which was a 2-year funded project through the Scottish Government's Workplace Qualities Fund to be how deliver neurodiverse training to managers to improve recruitment and retention for those with neurodiverse conditions within employment within Perth and Kinross Council. And we've been able to train 82 managers through this training. Though this project's come to an end, Perth and Kinross Council and PAS continue to work together to support those autistic individuals into modern apprenticeships within the council. So we continue to collaboratively work together and jointly to how we support individuals with, to be able to access and be part of employment within Perth and Kinross Council. We also undertook, had an test of change around our overnight responder service. This was a piece of work we wanted to do about how we improve the use of technology enhanced care within our provision, so it provides people with different ways of having their overnight care needs met. So we undertook a 6-month test of change, and a result of undertaking that test of change, we were able to reduce 1 waking night. So that's obviously an improvement around the use of resources within our services, but also some promoting that increased independence, so enabling people to live a more independent life, but still have the ability to access support and input if required during the night time. We are looking at a further 4 individuals, or we have 4 individuals have increased the access to overnight responder service as they've moved into their new accommodation, and we have continued, the work continues to look at how we expand that opportunity for others to be able to access the overnight responder service. When we think about health and qualities, and we recognise that within learning disabilities, people with learning disabilities are likely to die 20 years younger than the national population. So it's really important how we improve the health of people with a learning disability. And as part of that, we've been implementing the annual health checks, which is a Scottish Government requirement. And this has been delivered through our learning disabilities nursing service. And we've been able to undertake 138 health checks in the last 12 months. And we want to be able to increase that as we go forward, and we're working with our primary care colleagues as well as how we can deliver health checks across the whole learning disabilities community, and not just those that access our specialist learning disabilities health services. Our physio and OT services have been looking at how we develop our postural care services to meet with, again, the national requirements and the strategy of Your Posture Matters, because again, we recognise if we are not addressing postural care requirements, that does have can have a physical impact on individuals, and it can increase conditions and deterioration around health needs, which may again shorten people's lives. So it's taking that into consideration. So far, we have supported 9 individuals with assessment, and we do have some in mid-assessment. However, we do have a waiting list, and we do recognise that there is significant work we need to do, not just within the learning disabilities service, but across the wider health and social care partnership, of how we improve the pathways and processes around accessing postural care assessments and identifying what equipment people need as an outcome of those assessments. So we're looking at as much wider than just learning disabilities, but recognising that learning disabilities is one of the main cohorts would be accessing that. Around our autism support and looking around how we support people with autism, we've been looking at the work around one of the key areas that was fed back to us from people with an autism was around their mental health, which again takes into account what we were, the previous paper that was talked about as well around that mental health. How do we ensure people with autism are having their mental health needs met? And we did some work in March 2024 with 2 half-day workshops looking specifically around current services. What are the barriers to accessing that? What can we do to improve that? And we had 67 individuals attend those 2 workshops. And from those workshops, funding has been secured to develop some training resource through storytelling and a web page learning resource to build on the learning from the workshops and take that forward. There continues to be a financial pressure associated to autism and learning disabilities, and this is due to the increased demand and complexities of the packages of care that we're supporting. And it's estimated that there's additional pressure of 1.3 million in 2025 to 26, deriving from for the transition work that we're undertaking, the growing need within the population, within the community, but also taking into account our individuals who have been in long stay hospital. And just to note that the Health and Social Care Partnership don't receive any additional funding to support this increased demand. So through the work of the Complex Care Transformation Programme has supported how Perth and Kinross is delivering service differently. However, it doesn't negate the requirement to fund high cost packages of care. So we have been able to support in different ways and probably in some ways reduce some of the costs. But however, we do need to acknowledge that we do continue to have high cost packages of care. There has been significant work undertaken across the services in Perth and Kinross to support people with autism and learning disabilities, and that includes working with our third sector providers. However, our challenges continue to be around the increase in demand and the complexities within the financial challenging climate. We have created opportunities to enable the voices of those with lived experience to be heard. Now we need to continue to build on this through more opportunities for co-design and collaboration. There's been great examples of good practice, initiative work. However, there is more we can do to ensure those with autism and learning disabilities reduce the inequalities and promote inclusion. So that takes me to the end of my presentation today. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that introduction, Gillian. Can I ask members in the room and online if there are any questions or comments on the report? Councillor McCall.
Thank you, Gillian. That's a very good and comprehensive report. You mentioned that you're fully staffed. I'm just wondering if that includes specialist social workers dealing with different types.
Yes,
so
but
it's not generals, it's specialists.
No. So the social workers that come into the scope team are social workers, general social workers as all, but they get the training that they require. We continue to have a training programme within the scope team to enable them to have the knowledge, the expertise around learning disabilities and autism to be able to deliver that specialist service. And we're fully staffed in regards to that, which has been really positive because we had a real period through sort of the summertime to autumn last year. We had a bit of turnover of staff, which then obviously means when we bring new staff in, we need to be able to support them to be trained up and so that they can deliver that the service.
Thank you. That's very encouraging to hear, because I do know that the difference between a generalist and a specialist can be quite stark when it comes to understanding and even knowing how to approach a particular situation. My second question around capacity is really about capacity in speech and language, because they perform, in my opinion anyway, perform an excellent service in helping to identify the level of understanding that a person might have. But I know it's difficult to get them. So maybe you can give me some update on that.
Yeah, so the speech and language therapy doesn't actually sit within the partnership, so within Perth and Kinross, but we have one speech, or we have speech and language therapists who are aligned to the learning disabilities health team, and they are part of the whole team. So even though they're not under the Health and Social Care Partnership, they are aligned to us and work with us, and we are fully staffed in regards to the capacity that is available around speech and language, if that's probably the best way I can describe it. But I would absolutely agree with you. It's a very finite, small resource that we have, but we are fully staffed within what is available to us.
I'm just, I suppose, thank you for that. That is reassuring, but I do think it's underestimated what they can bring, particularly in terms of early identification or even intervention early on before a situation becomes more acute. And so I'm just wondering if there's any potential or opportunity to do an ideal capacity planning scenario, speech and language service, going forward. Something to think about. I don't know if you have. There's no answer to that right now. I don't think. So maybe something to think about.
Definitely, and I say they are part of all the development work that we're doing around our learning disabilities integration work. So yes, absolutely take that into account.
Thanks, Gillian, and thanks for that answer, and thanks for your question, Councillor McCall. I think what that does is leave us with probably an intent to go away and relook at that, because as we are shifting away from inpatient services to more services in the community, is that something that we can encourage in terms of moving the expertise into the community? So I think we can take that forward with the work in terms of learning disabilities transition work.
I think that's a good idea, Jackie and Gillian, because very often by the time speech and language therapy or speech and language service has been engaged, sometimes it's almost like an afterthought. Sometimes it feels like, or it's and had they been engaged much earlier and in a much more routine way, then I think perhaps situations wouldn't escalate so much. So I'd be very supportive of that. Thank you.
Councillor Illingworth.
Right, thank you, Gillian, for the report. You mentioned that learning disabled and autistic people can have a life expectancy 20 years less. But are we not seeing learning disabled and autistic people living far longer than they used to? My memory is of of Down syndrome, there was life expectancy of about 40.
Yes, they are increasing, but I suppose our general age range is increasing as well. So yeah, we're all living longer, but I think there's still that disparity. That information is based on the 2011 census, because actually at the moment we haven't got the stats out of the 2022 census. They've not drilled down into that yet around learning disability, so it'll be interesting to see the difference around that. But that currently is what is still the data that, or the information that is being shared sort of nationally around, as we continue to still have a 20-year age difference, in particular around learning disabilities. Yeah.
Councillor McCall.
I'd just like to add to that a little bit. I think people with certain learning disabilities age at a different rate as well, in terms of risk factors and general health. I know that during COVID, people with Down syndrome, for example, their risk age was in their 40s to 50s, whereas for the general population it was about 20 years older. So I think there's lessons to be learned all along, but all of those factors need to be considered, particularly in the early intervention and prevention.
Thank you. Ms. Dunk.
Thanks very much, Gillian, for the report. I thought it was an excellent report, and I would commend everybody in the team on the achievements, because I think it's really significant to show the distance travelled here, and there's lots of significant impacts that you've demonstrated in the report. But the thing that hit me the most when I was reading it was actually the poem that 3 people at one of your core and cluster groups created. And I think if you need evidence for the impact of the services that are being provided and the way in which they are being provided and the whole coming home policy, it's that poem, because it really focuses the mind on what the individuals feel and how they are made to feel by being in their own home. So I would just like to say thank you to everybody who's been involved in that, and hope we're sending that poem to the Scottish Government to let them know the good progress that's going on in Perth and Kinross. So thanks very much.
Thank you.
I was just checking if Jackie was going to perform the poem at the Chief Officers meeting with the Scottish Government tomorrow. Yes, come in, Chief Officer.
I would just like to thank you for your observations, Heather, in relation to the outcomes and that are demonstrated in this report.
But I think just as an example, you've mentioned 138 people have had an annual health check this year. But in my mind, I think last year that was something like 75. So I think it's showing the progression and the reach of the work that's been overseen here, which I think this is the outcomes are absolutely demonstrated here and captured, but still more to do and still more to hear about. Thanks.
And a comment from Mr. Russell online.
Gillian, thank you for the report. I agree with previous comments. It's really good to see both the quality of the work that's been undertaken, but the impact that it's having on people who have been in touch with the service. It's a really important message to deliver in these reports. And I chair the Tayside Steering Group for the delivery of annual health checks, and Perth and Kinross are making significant progress through the Learning Disability Intensive Support Service. And we've just completed the Tayside return on the number of annual health checks that have been completed. Part of the issue that we've got at the moment is we don't fully understand the population in terms of the number of people who would be eligible for a health check as set out in the directions. So there's a lot of work happening at GP practice level to identify people who would be eligible for a health check, which will then help inform what the delivery model will look like. But good progress being made in Perth and Kinross, and thanks for the report.
Thank you.
And Ms. Douglas.
Hi. Am I on? Yes, sorry, I didn't know. All I could see was the green light there. Yes, thanks, Gillian. And I know Public Health, my team's also been in touch with both your team and also in the Dundee team to start to develop a bit of a test of change around how we can capture some of the outcomes from the health checks in terms of tracking people through the system to look at the impact of those health checks as well, particularly thinking about cancer screening programs, because we know early detection of cancer is not great for people with learning disabilities. So just want to kind of add that piece of work. We're just waiting on Caldecott approval to undertake that data linkage. And I suppose the other piece of work on the back of that is when we're conducting our invasive cancer audits, we're starting to look at, can we actually identify if someone has a learning disability as well in terms of cancer outcomes as well, and looking at their journey again, because we also know that there is a huge unwanted variation in terms of access to treatment for people who've got a learning disability. So that work is, I just kind of supposed to assure people that that work is also kind of happening behind the scenes as well.
Okay, thank you. Thanks very much for the, I'm not seeing any further questions or comments. I'm not seeing any further, sorry. Thank you for the report, Gillian. I think it's remarkable. I mean, there's lots of good points that people have pulled out in different areas of the report. The couple I noticed were that in terms of independent living, we were supporting many more people at home, but doing so at the same time as observing a reduction in the cost of those care packages. And then in terms of the reduction in the scope team, over a 1 year period there, we've got a graph showing a 40% reduction in the number of bed days for long-term hospital stay. And then in terms of supporting service users, no new admissions to hospital, but at the same time having to deal with an increased number of users, an increasing number of service users. So managing all of those multiple and competing demands is and doing it so well is a really good piece of news, I think. As there are no other comments on the report, can we note progress to date on the Autism and Learning Disability Strategic Delivery Plan and note the development of a further 3-year strategic delivery plan? Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks for your attendance online. Thank you, Gillian.
Yep.
Okay. Does anybody do we want to take another paper before we maybe have a short recess? Sorry? It'll be quick. Okay. Thanks. Thanks for answering me, because thanks for answering me. Okay, so we'll move on now to the 3-year workforce plan 2022 to 2025, and despite being retired or semi-retired, welcome back to Evelyn Devine, who's going to introduce the report. Evelyn.
Thank you, Chair. I promised to be quick. I did my health and safety meeting earlier in 1 minute and 45 seconds. So anyway, so this is really the final update for the last 3-year workforce plan that went from 22 to 25, and it ends its life cycle in June. So really what we're asking the IJB to do today is to note the significant progress that I think we have made against all our work programmes, and to endorse the intention to refresh the strategy and look at the workforce challenges moving forward for 25 to 28. And we're hoping to bring that workforce strategy back in October to the IJB. So the challenges remain pretty much the same moving in. We've already commenced the drafting of the new strategy, and the challenges we're seeing remain pretty much the same. The ageing workforce, you know, our staff age, the highest brackets are between 45 and 64, recruitment and retention, staff wellbeing, and our ageing population, as we all know very much that we have that. So we've recently given a presentation to the IJB on this paper, so we weren't planning to go through the paper in any detail at all today, because I think you've had an opportunity to ask lots of questions, and it's getting late. However, I would like to formally acknowledge some of the work that's happened and the leadership that's been given through our work stream leads. And I think it's really important to acknowledge the work they've done, certainly around the Health and Care Staffing Act of 2019. This has been a massive challenge over the last year and a half. And it has taken a lot of involvement from our senior service managers and our professional leads in order to be able to implement the bill, which is actually fully implemented now. We've had to run new workforce tools across all health specialties. We've had to get staff engagement, get staff to understand what the bill's all about, or the Act's all about, and also we've had to introduce new electronic systems across the piece in terms of safe care. So, and that will allow us then to monitor staff in a real-time way. So massive amount of work, and you know, congratulations to the team and the work stream that have managed to achieve that. Secondly, to our recruitment and retention work stream, who also have done a significant amount of work, you know, coordinating work with higher education institutions, promoting career fairs, social media campaigns, improving recruitment retention and things like care at home. And really trying to support our remote and rural areas as well. So again, a big thank you to them. And again, to our learning and development work stream, which is very much a clinical based work stream, looking at trying to make sense of the landscape actually across health and social care and across Tayside and PKC around what can be available for our staff in relation to learning and development. And lastly, to our wellbeing work stream, an awful lot of work has happened, and you'll see that throughout the paper in terms of supporting staff and nurturing staff in a wellbeing way. And we have re-established our work stream leads for this now, and have a good way forward. So next steps for us in terms of, we have a programme board, and we are already, as I said, we've got nearly a first draft of the next workforce strategy for 25 to 28. And we have made connections across Tayside now, and with the 3 councils, the 3 HSCPs and acute services, and really working to see how we can coordinate what we need to do in relation to our workforce per se. And of course, we have an EQIA to write and consult upon as well. So that's really where we got to. I don't know how long it took me, but hopefully not too long.
Thank you very much, Evelyn. Are there any questions or comments on the workforce plan? I'm going to cut this really short, but for fear of somebody actually coming in at this point. Okay. Dave.
Thanks. So just to follow up what Evelyn's saying is that 3 of the 4 workshops, working group work streams, I've got myself on it and the third sector as well. So when Evelyn's talking about we, as in the partnership, it's a wider partnership as well, which is really good, is that we've got that influence and voice in there to work as a partnership. And that goes through the things like career fairs and that as well. So it's a message out there to the public that it's the wider partnership. So it's really good to be involved in that. Thanks.
Thanks very much. Glad to hear that. Right, okay, no more. So can we note progress, the significant progress against all programmes of work outlined in and funded under the Health and Social Care Partnership's 3-year Workforce Plan 22 to 25, and endorse the intention to refresh the 3-year workforce plan to align with the current IGB strategic plan and reflect how we will address ongoing workforce challenges. Thank you very much. I think we'll take at least one more paper before, so we've finished the sort of substantive item 6 on the agenda, before I come and ask you if you want another break. So we have the Alcohol and Drug Partnership annual update and annual reporting survey. This report is going to be introduced by Charlie Cranmer, who's the Alcohol and Drug Partnership's lead officer. Charlie.
Thank you, Chair. So this report provides the IGB with an update of the work of the Perth and Kinross Alcohol and Drug Partnership over the past 12 months to progress our strategic delivery plan. IGB is asked to note this progress and to request an update in 12 months' time. The report also presents the Perth and Kinross ADP response to the Scottish Government's National ADP Annual Reporting Survey. This survey reports on local delivery of the Scottish Government's National Mission on Drugs and activities relating to alcohol. And in this case, IGB is asked to approve the content of the survey prior to submission to the Scottish Government. So when looking at the report itself, following extensive consultation with all ADP partners, including those in the statutory sector, third sector and our local recovery communities, Perth and Kinross ADP launched our new 3-year strategic delivery plan in 2024. Building on the successes of the previous 3-year plan, the new plan focuses on 4 key local priorities. And those priorities are, first one I think might be a bit familiar given our earlier discussion, prevention and early intervention. It's good to see a consistency there. Our other priorities are reducing the harms caused by alcohol and drugs, developing our recovery-oriented system of care, our ROSC, and also getting it right for children, young people, families and communities. We also have an additional 6 general priorities which cut across all areas of ADP work. And these include placing living and lived experience, again, a theme we were talking earlier on about, at the heart of all ADP activity, equalities and human rights, and tackling stigma. So the report itself describes the work undertaken and the progress made in addressing each of these priorities during the first year of our plan, which ran from April 24 to March 25. And some of this work includes, there's more detail in the report, but under prevention and early intervention, pan-Tayside ADP funding for an alcohol brief intervention coordinator with a role to increase the number of alcohol brief interventions in different settings across Perth and Kinross. Under our priority of reducing the harms caused by alcohol and drugs, we've seen the rollout of a drug testing strip test of change. Got there, good, in response to the threat posed by synthetic opioids. We've also been involved in embedding the improvements made following the implementation of the MAT standards, work that's been ongoing for the past couple of years. Under our developing our ROSC priority, this year has seen a partnership with Scottish Recovery Consortium to start to develop our new ROSC. We've also expanded our range of recovery activities throughout Perth and Kinross, and that's included supporting Recover May, which is our month-long celebration of recovery. again referred to earlier in the meeting, there's been a lot of work looking at our development of a multi-agency consultation hub for people with co-occurring mental health and substance use issues who require specialist treatment. We've expanded our successful community alcohol detox service. We've continued to support the Complex Needs Coordination Project, that's in partnership with our community justice partners, to provide additional support to some of the most vulnerable members of our communities. And we've also developed a new ADP website with the purpose of providing service information and information about recovery activities throughout our communities, plus also information about substances and their effects. And finally, under our Getting It Right for Children, Young People, Families and Communities priority, last year saw the relaunch of our Hillcrest Futures Young Persons Service, which is there to support young people aged 12 to 16, and also an expansion of our Barnardo's Hopscotch service, which supports children and young people impacted by parental substance use. And I'm delighted to say that the impact of these projects has resulted in notable progress being made in each of the 4 local priorities. And that includes an increase across all 4 quarters of 24-25 in the number of alcohol brief interventions being delivered in Perth and Kinross, from 383 in 23-24 to 596 in 24-25. We've also importantly seen a reduction in our suspected drug deaths. And they've fallen from 20 people in 23-24 to 10 in 24-25. And I will say a couple of additional things about that. Just to caveat that, these are suspected drug deaths. We don't get the official figures from NRS until August. So our suspected drug deaths numbers give us some indication of where we expect the numbers to be. And again, it's very difficult to talk about this topic and refer to numbers. Obviously, we're talking about people, and our numbers, whatever they are still too high. And we are continuing to work as hard as possible to bring those numbers down. But it is promising to see that we do seem to have seen a decline in the number of people. Also, positively, we've seen a higher proportion of people commencing alcohol treatment than we saw in the previous year. Also, over 90% of people commenced drug treatment in 24-25, which is similar to the previous year. We've also had over 90% of treatment starts for drug and alcohol within the community, starting within 3 weeks following initial assessment. And that's similar to the numbers again in 23-24. So there's a consistency of good performance across now 2 or 3 years. And we've also further progressed our implementation and embedding of the MAT standards, with 9 standards now fully implemented across a range of settings and services. And just briefly, the second report that's part of the main report is our Scottish Government ADP Annual Reporting Survey. This requires all ADPs to report on local delivery of the National Mission on Drugs and activities relating to alcohol. And that data is used by Scottish Government to inform national progress and also future policy direction. Further to the progress that I've highlighted in the main report, local responses to the survey also highlight the wide range of local harm reduction initiatives that we're offering in different settings. It flags up continued partnership work with our justice partners, further development of our near fatal overdose pathway, and a continuation of our whole family approach from partners when planning and delivering services. So to conclude, both the main report and the annual reporting survey highlight the good progress made in the first year of our annual strategic delivery plan across all of our 4 priorities. The second year of the plan is obviously already underway, and it aims to continue and build on the achievements of the first year. So, for example, we already have plans in place to deliver harm reduction and naloxone training to Perth and Kinross Council's Leadership Forum, which comprises over 100 leaders across the council. Work is also underway to review and enhance both our inpatient and community alcohol detox pathways. And we have a project in place where we'll be working with Aberlour to increase support to pregnant women and women with babies under 12 months who've been affected by substance use. So to conclude, Perth and Kinross ADP remain committed to reducing the harms associated with alcohol and drugs and to facilitate recovery opportunities for all our communities in Perth and Kinross and to enable people to live their best possible lives. So, thank you. I'm happy to take questions.
Thank you, Mr. Cranmer. Mr. Black, your first question.
Again, I declare the interest. I'm the alcohol and drug champion for NHS Tayside. And it's really good to see the progress that has been made in the alcohol and drug partnership, but there's still some issues I find that needs to be addressed, really needs to be addressed. It's okay telling us 158 people had an alcohol brief intervention. What happened? And what happened? I could go to East Fife ground on Saturday and I could see 158 people that need an alcohol a brief intervention. Yeah. But what happens? What happens to them? Like, and that's the evidence. And the evidence is that there's a lot of targeted drugs here, quite rightly so. But the fact is, it's still alcohol that's costing the NHS and health and social care partnerships the most money. And that needs to be, how do we deal with that? It's great to see some rehab starting to come in. It's a positive way. It's great to actually see that you've put living and lived experience. We were talking about that. And that's great that now we've got people who are living with it and people who have actually lived with it are able to work with them. And you got my definition. Lived experience is somebody who's lived with a disease, not read something out of a book. And I always love the 22-year-old that's getting out harm reduction that's telling you, well, cut down your units. Okay? And the stigma, tackling stigma, how we've got to do it. How's that stigma? If you go to an A&E on a Saturday night, you'll see stigma. And if you go to some shops, you'll see stigma. And how are we going to reduce that stigma across society, not just in Perth and Kinross? I know in the Tayside Health and Charitable Foundation, we've granted some money to somebody to do a PhD on how to tackle stigma. And I'm sitting on that source. I could tell them without having to do 3 years of research, like, and then mostly I think 90 people out of 100 could do that. But we need to change that thinking. We need to change the way that's going to be. People do want to be alcoholic. People don't want to have a substance use, a addiction skin. But how do we deal with it?
Thank you very much. I'll pick up on the two issues that you raised there. For alcohol brief interventions, you're right, it's very difficult. It's actually very difficult to record the number of alcohol brief interventions because they can happen in lots of different settings and we don't actually have a tool where we can record it. So there's a lot of work going on, even just to try and measure how many we're carrying out. But you're right about the follow-up, and alcohol for our ADP is becoming far more of a focus. There's been such a focus on drugs and particularly on opioids, and that's been understandable because of the situation we've experienced across Scotland. But we know from the data that we constantly get back that alcohol is always there, and in fact, in some cases, it is increasing. So that's a key focus. It's the reason that we're looking at our community alcohol detox pathway work, both inpatient and in the community, because then we know that there's more that we can do there to try and help our service users. We're also involved in pathway work across Tayside because both Dundee and Angus have acknowledged that it would be really worthwhile to enhance the pathways that we've already got. So rather than doing that individually, we're going to work together and look at how we can improve those pathways. So there's a number of different things that we're already looking at, but over the course of the next year, we're certainly keen to try and look at other ways to address the issue as well, because it's something that, it's obviously been an issue for a number of years. It's got a bit lost, and I will acknowledge that, but that will not be the case as we go forward, because we need to acknowledge that, and I think do even more to try and address some of the problems that we're seeing. With your second point around stigma, yes, I mean, stigma continues to be such an issue. Scottish Government had indicated that they were going to launch a national stigma campaign and some actions around that. So we haven't developed a campaign ourselves because we're keen to work with Scottish Government to look at that. But locally, I mean, every day, both all our staff work and challenge stigma whenever we see it, both to try and support our service users, but our staff as well experience stigma across services. So it really is a constant challenge to address that stigma, to tackle it, and to make sure that people are properly informed about the situation that our service users find themselves in. So it's a daily challenge and an ongoing basis, but also when I know that Hillcrest Futures, for example, one of our partners in the past had developed an anti-stigma campaign, and we will continue to work with our partners as well and support any campaigns that they develop over the next period of time.
Thanks very much for all that, but I really would like to see a cost analysis of the impact of alcohol on our services. And I'm a great believer once I better not see bean counters will go around, but once the financial people start to realise how much it actually impacts across Scotland, and not just here, then they might shake a leg.
Thank you. It's been a while now since there's been national calculations about the cost of alcohol use, alcohol misuse. It's quite difficult to do that at a local level because often it's difficult to have the capacity to do that. But we're certainly keen to continue to work nationally to try and look at that data. I know that Alcohol Focus Scotland, they produce local breakdowns of alcohol consumption and some of the effects and causes there. So I'm actually in a meeting tomorrow with Alcohol Focus Scotland. So that's something that as ADPs we can keep pushing them to try and work with us to produce that data, because it would be of real use to update the information that we previously had, which is now quite out of date.
Martin, I was just going to say something about your points about stigma, and what I will do following this meeting is send on some photographs from a gala day event on Saturday, which was organised by an integrated drug and alcohol team, and I think you'll see just in those photographs the real fun, joy and inclusive approach that took place. But it's really important that that's across all services. So I think the event that Charlie was talking about across our Perth and Kinross leadership forum, which is service managers, every service manager and above in the council, in terms of the naloxone training, it's more than just naloxone training. It's much more about an awareness raising of the issues and the impact, so that all services are able to understand, have an awareness, and therefore can have that much more trauma-informed approach that Aaron's leading for the council. So just to give you some reassurance that we're really working across services and across the whole partnership in relation to that.
Thanks very much, and certainly I think I know that Charlie, you said that there was not clear sort of recent national statistics, but certainly around 15 years ago, maybe there was a sort of calculation that £1 invested in, I think it was specifically recovery services, would save the public purse across the whole of the public sector piece around £10 in the long run. Councillor Illingworth, you were next with a question.
Right, thank you. We're seeing across Scotland a reduction in alcohol consumption. Is that yet affecting the demand for your services for alcohol help?
We're still seeing quite a consistent demand on services. We've not seen a big drop, and what we're seeing, in fact, in our services is increasingly complex cases coming to our services, which of course is putting in additional demand on the resources that we have available. And those services are also dealing with folk who may be using drugs as well. So when you add it together, we're not really seeing that drop off. So the pressure remains on services, although, you know, we will see some drops. We've seen drops recently in the number of people using opioids, but it's being offset by the number of people who may be using other substances as well. So it still remains quite a difficult and challenging picture in terms of the number of people coming through the door and then requiring a lot of additional help. Whereas previously, perhaps the need wasn't as great.
Councillor McCall.
Thank you. I just want to pick up a little bit on what Martin and others have said about stigma, because I think there's a gendered aspect to this as well that starts quite early on, particularly in relation to alcohol in schools, even because I've seen it firsthand, much to my shock. There is a lot of double standards, and I know that a lot of the work that you do is dealing with the consequences of misuse, but somewhere along the way we've got to think about how we, again, if we're talking about prevention and early intervention, how we educate people, but B, also look at all the drivers that contribute to people, you know, ending up in a situation where there is the misuse in the first place. And again, it's comments made earlier about working with the council and trying to alleviate poverty, etc., etc. But I think it'd be quite interesting to know how we engage with the Violence Against Women Partnership in terms of stigma, gender stigma, because as we all know, and I know Charlie, you from other work that we've done as well in community justice, women are often disproportionately affected by the impacts of that, either directly themselves or with the household environment that they live in, and then getting involved in the criminal justice system. So I think that piece of it shouldn't be forgotten, that stigma exists, but it exists to different degrees within different cohorts. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, you're right. And having a gendered approach to some of our services is particularly important. I'm actually about to be involved in some work with Jennifer McComish from the Violence Against Women Partnership to specifically work with the Improvement Service to look at that issue around violence and around substance use and around women. So that's something that we will have a real focus on as we go forward. You're right. You know, it is often, it can be very different experiences for different genders. So we need to make sure that in our service planning and our service delivery, we just don't assume it's a one size fits all approach. And, you know, we know that already in substance use, we have good links with OWLS, for example, the OWLS service. And that's something that, you know, we'll continue to look to do and develop interventions in conjunction with them. There's one example of you know, how we can work.
Okay. If I could maybe just ask about this suspected drug deaths. So two things, I think. You were careful to say it was suspected because the NRS figures don't come until August, which is obviously a time delay due to collating them. A few years ago, there was an issue in terms of diagnosis, though, because of the lack of testing capacity, and I just wondered whether we were past that point now and it was only about data collation rather than test.
Thank you for the question. Unfortunately, no. There's still national delays in both the toxicology work that we need to be able to make a full assessment, and also some of the Police Scotland reporting and the investigation around some of the incidents. There are delays there. So in our Tayside Drug Death Review Group, we're still reviewing some cases from 2024, but that isn't unique to Tayside. So it's why when we talk about suspected drug deaths and then we get the final total, there can be that disparity, because there has to be that there is that delay and then catch up before we can get the full picture. So hence it's the caveat.
Thank you. And then the other question, I fully accept what you're saying about you know, remembering that these are not statistics, that these are real people. But in terms of the trend, you were talking about a downward trend from 20 suspected drug deaths to, I think you said 10 suspected drug deaths, but across a national or against the backdrop of a national increase. Is there something that we're doing differently in Perth and Kinross, or is it just a sort of statistical fluctuation from year to year, do you think?
Very difficult to say, but, you know, I think our and again, I'll talk about numbers and you know, forgive me for doing that, but for the purposes of this answer, it's probably quicker, but our numbers are small in a relative sense. Therefore, changes, you know, can look perhaps more significant than they are. There's certainly a huge amount of work, and I've tried to outline some of the work there that we're doing. But then there's lots of work going on across the country, you know, partly because of MAT standards and other things. So it's difficult to assess whether there's specific things that we're doing locally, or whether, you know, perhaps we're just seeing, you know, some other factors coming into play. I think we look as if we have a reduction this year. The previous 2 years, our numbers were relatively stable. So I maybe wouldn't like to talk about a trend in this at this point in time. Perhaps next year, you know, if we see again, you know, a reduction or even a stabilisation of that reduction, I would be more confident to talk about a trend. But I'm always wary, because we have, and we've seen them in Perth and Kinross as well, small issues at the moment with nitazines, so synthetic opioids that are in the drug supply, that may at some point cause a spike, and then, you know, we may be having a different conversation, unfortunately. So I think I approach these with a lot of caution for a number of different reasons. But the situation at this point looks more positive than it has been.
Thank you very much. And I think we'll go for a final question to Mrs. Summers.
Just really to continue on from what you said, if I'd gotten before you, that's what I would have been asking. It was about the drug-related deaths that published in August each year, and how it says that the data provides a general guide to the drug death position in across Tayside, but as it is based on suspected death drugs, does not directly correspond to the NRS annual data. Now, are we above or below what they say?
Thank you. It's a good question. Typically, the NRS data will end up being slightly higher than our suspected drug deaths numbers. And one of the reasons for that is that the NRS data also includes completed suicides where substances have been involved, and our drug death group and the figures don't include those numbers. So hence that's one of the disparities in the numbers. There's also sometimes differences between the cases that NRS have and the cases that the Tayside Drug Death Review Group looks at. So there's some anomalies across the two sets of data, but typically the NRS data is slightly higher than our own suspected drug death numbers.
What exactly do we look at when we're recording drug deaths?
So it's based on police reports where it's a suspected overdose situation, but it doesn't include reports where it's suspected it's a completed suicide. So that's really the key difference between the stats that we look at in the group.
Okay. Councillor McCall, presentation comment, please.
Yeah, it's just on the appendix 1 on pages 6, 7 and 8, there's a number of dark blue banners with writing print on it that I can't really read very well. I don't know if it's just my mature eyes or whether it's meant to be in white, but it's quite difficult to read. So maybe if that could be corrected, please. Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thanks very much. Is it a quick one, Martin?
I would suggest that it's age, the demographics age, that would kind of float the findings that you're getting in the reduction. And secondly, the increase in females that are now in recovery. When I first started, there was 10%. The population, females were in Alcoholics Anonymous. It's now up to 50.
Okay, thank you very much. Not seeing any further questions or comments in the chat or in the room. So can we note progress with the Alcohol and Drug Partnership Strategic Delivery Plan 24 to 27? And specifically, what we have to do is approve the annual reporting survey 24-25 is set out in Appendix 2 for services delegated to the Health and Social Care Partnership. And then thirdly, can we request an update in 12 months' time? Is that acceptable to everybody? Thank you very much. Okay, it's now 4:30. I would still like to finish by 5, but do people want a break for strictly 5 minutes? No? Keep going? Okay, so item 7 on the agenda then is our slot for finance and also audit and performance committee, but there have been no audit and performance committee meetings since the last meeting of the IJB. I understand that one is scheduled for next Monday. Oh, sorry, 23rd. So one coming up shortly after this meeting of the IJB. So we will go over then to the Chief Finance Officer for the 24-25 financial position.
Thank you, Chair. Good afternoon, everyone. This report brings to you the final outturn position, and that's therefore the actual expenditure against budget from April last year to the end of March 2025. Before introducing the report, I would like to thank the Health and Social Care Finance team for their work. The final outturn report is normally presented at the end of June, but thanks to the team and their additional efforts, we've been able to bring it to the board for consideration today. The final outturn position is highlighted and also compared to plan at section 2.6 of the report in front of you today. And while recognising several risks, the IJB had planned to balance in 24-25 with a small general reserve balance remaining. But as reported throughout the year, through increasing need, through costs and complexity, this has led to moving into an overspend position. And our final outturn, after further use of both earmarked and general reserves, is an overspend of 1.6 million. As shown in Appendix 1, this relates to services delivered through health budgets and as per our integration scheme and financial risk share. This is shared as an overspend with NHS Tayside. In section 3 of the report, the variances are described in detail, highlighting the main areas of overspend within both older people and adult services. And those in older people services are mainly within care at home, residential and nursing placements, community hospitals, particularly in the south locality, and within our psychiatry of old age inpatient service. Within adult services, the majority of overspend has been within packages of care for adults and for packages to support our unpaid carers. And within drug costs and prescribing, and that's been a topic of much of our discussions in both our budget development sessions and our meetings where we've been considering the financial position. And the final outturn is an overspend of £1.977 million, and this is 935,000 more than we planned. But we do have measures taken to address this in our 25-26 budget. The report and appendices provide a summary of the savings delivered in year, and other than that shortfall in delivery of the fairly ambitious drug costs and prescribing savings plan, all other planned savings were delivered recurrently and in full. You will recall a financial recovery plan was presented to the IJB back in October, with progress updates being provided at each meeting since then. And section 4 of the report includes the detail. And I can report that the targeted reduction from the agreed measures were delivered in full. And in taking these actions, we can assure this has prevented a larger overspend at the year end. I have also included, and Jackie referred to in her item, that we've included reference to the recent IJB Finance Bulletin that was published by the Accounts Commission. And it is important that we consider this and its key messages when we review our financial outturn and when we look to 25-26 and beyond. The Accounts Commission is reporting its findings on the national position, but these are very similar to the challenges that we are facing in Perth and Kinross. Jackie also mentioned in our strategic update that a letter has been sent to the Cabinet Secretary, making clear the substantial financial shortfalls and the risks that that poses to the ability to deliver current services, and also how this is a significant risk for the achievement of the Scottish Government Service Renewal Framework ambition. Therefore, looking forward to 25-26 and our financial planning for future years, we will be pushed to stabilise costs and manage risks to come within the budget available. Much of the work is already underway, but is required to reach that work is required to reach a sustainable position ongoing. A report will be brought to the next IGB in August, providing the first financial projection for 25-26. And I hope to provide an update on our financial planning and our approach to strengthen the delivery of our agreed financial strategy in light of the growing operational and financial pressures that we face. I'm happy to take any questions members may have.
Thank you very much, Donna. Any questions? Mrs. Sutherland.
I was reading through and I see that when it comes to the care at home, there was an overspend, although the level of unmet need decreased. And it seems that this has been achieved predominantly through the purchase of external home care packages. And I'm just wondering if there is going to be a decrease in budget available, and that would mean a decrease in any monies that could go towards such agencies, then how is that going to actually balance things out? Because if you're going to be having less available budget to take in external packages, then how is the need going to be met?
Thank you, Nancy. So just to confirm, that's absolutely correct. The report does highlight that. So on the good news is that we've reduced our unmet need fairly significantly, but that does come at a cost. And for 24-25, that came at a cost of around £500,000, and recurrently that's about £1 million for us to keep delivering that level of unmet need. You won't be surprised to hear that one of the main things I'll be highlighting in the first financial projection in August will be around care at home, and our ability to continue to deliver care at that level in the way that we are doing so. So it's not so much that there's a decrease in budget available, it's just there's more pressure on that budget to deliver more care. But it may be worth it. Colleague Zoe Robertson's on call. It may be worth Zoe coming in at this point. She's the lead for care at home.
Hello, yes. Yeah, it's quite a complex question, Nettie, because I suppose the simple thing to do just be to think about the care at home delivery within it, but care at home delivers within a whole system set of improvements and a range of transformation projects. And I suppose for us at the moment, we haven't completed our transformation of care at home, but the first stage in that was obviously targeting that unmet need that had sat there for a really significant period of time. And the longer people sit with that unmet need, the more complex they become, the larger the packages of care become. But it's intrinsically linked to our delayed discharge work and our improvement in that. And our discharge without delay programme of work. So there are a series of actions that will come through the care at home transformation work and linked to those. And at the moment we have an early discharge project which we commission externally that will be absorbed by an internal resource, and we've been transitioning that over the course of the last 6 months, which will reduce that expenditure. We are looking at our per city care at home delivery model. At the moment we have a zero unmet need in per city and have had for a prolonged period of time, which would indicate that the market is more than able to cope with, and in actual fact providers are asking for more work. So we are looking at whether we can reduce our internal care at home resource, which is more expensive than external care at home, is important to acknowledge in there, and whether or not we can do that market transfer, and that will result in some savings for us. Of course, the work that we're doing to improve delayed discharges will mean that people coming home are less impacted by prolonged hospital stays, which means the size of the packages of care will reduce. Option 1, self-directed support packages of care were used a lot, particularly in the south locality, until our new contract started last year. I would imagine we will see a reduction in that because self-directed support option 1 wasn't necessarily being selected because it's what people wanted, it's because they couldn't get option 3, and that's no longer the case as well. So there'll be a change in how some of the packages of care are delivered. And our ability just to keep people at home in their localities will continue to improve as our integrated teamwork continues to be rolled out. And at the moment that's just been fully established within Per City, but both north and south localities will be moving towards fully integrated team models with urgent care delivery within that. And that would seek to stop people going into hospital, but also to maintain people in their own homes without them requiring care home placements as well. So there's a period of time that still needs to transpire before we know what that care at home transformation work, what the rehab bed transformation programme and the integrated teamwork will look like in its eventuality. At that point in time, I think we'll have a much more accurate picture of what it is that we genuinely require funding wise to support people who need care at home as it is just now, because as we've discussed multiple times, the number of our population is aging, as is complexity. So the service could never stand still. It was always going to have to increase. But as Donna says, that there has to be a kind of balance in there with how do we meet that need and how do we afford to continue to meet that need. So I don't think we're at the end of the journey in terms of transformation at this point in time, and I would be hopeful that within the next 3 to 6 months that we will have a more defined idea of what that is going to look like. But it certainly is going to require us to be very agile in terms of how we use that market, both internally and externally.
Another question I had is regarding the old age psychiatry service, which also has a reported overspend and the increase that's forecasted. Obviously, as people have lived longer, the evidence for more of the things that will fall under the dementia umbrella has been increasing. And this is going to continue to increase as people now live longer. So these diagnoses are becoming more prevalent. And I'm just wondering how this difficulty will be managed when we're looking at that compared to budget, because there is quite a high population of older adults in Perth and Kinross. So I'm just curious as to how that will be looked at.
Zoe, do you want to come in on that again, please? Jane apparently is going to come in on that.
Thanks. Well, interestingly, the answer to that's probably both of us. Yeah, we're very well aware of some of the challenges that the services are facing because of the population changes, the nature of complexity in the people that are presenting to us with increasing frailty and associated mental health issues. And that in itself is driving different workforce models to ensure people are safe and appropriately cared for. So probably what I can say at the moment is that we're looking very closely at the next few years and how we can provide a sustainable model that is safe and appropriate for these individuals. And the only way we can do that is probably for Zoe and I to work very closely together to make sure that the needs of individuals are considered in the round.
Vice Chair.
Chair, thank you. It was just a quick point. Can we record a note of thanks to Jackie and her team in delivering what's been a difficult year and could have been a lot worse? Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think, just as you said, it's a whole team approach, and really just to say, I appreciate your thanks, but I need to extend that to the whole team, not just the people who you engage with around this table, but it goes for much further and much beyond that. And just at every level in terms of contributing to that, because if you think about the vacancy management and what we've managed to achieve in that, that's everybody at every level actually having to work pretty hard on that. So thanks very much, Brian.
Any other? Oh, Mrs. Summer.
So I'm just looking at the table at 2.7 where it says that inpatient services, the 2.929 million. You got that, Donna? Can you see where I'm coming at? I just wondered how they arrive at that figure, considering that it's will it be a pot for the 3 IJBs, and how do we work out Perth and Kinross's share?
Thank you, Maureen. I'm grateful to be able to give a bit of clarity around that. So the table on 2.7, what it provides in that first line is that final position, so that 1.6 million that I talked about as our overspend that we're all recognising that we were kind of tracking on throughout the year. The second line is the contribution to inpatient mental health. So you'll see in the I'm trying to think where it might be, Mark, it might be in a section later on. There's actually a section in the report on inpatient mental health, and in there it describes what the overall inpatient mental health final outturn was. So that's the Tayside position, section 6, and it's 5 point, a double act here, sorry. 5.271 million was what the overspend for inpatient mental health came in at. And you may recall at an earlier IGB, we were talking about how the inpatient mental health budget isn't actually delegated to the IGBs. We do have that strategic responsibility, and there's a bit of a confusing governance and landscape around all that. But at a previous IGB, we talked about the IGB delegating authority to both the Chief Officer and the Chief Finance Officer to have discussions around a risk share that would deal with the 24-25 position. Wasn't setting a precedent, wasn't setting the way that we're going to be going forward, because there's the work on the financial framework that Jackie talked about in the earlier paper still to be done. But in order for us to present something this year, how would the inpatient mental health overspend be managed? And what was agreed is that there would be a quartered share between NHS Tayside and the 3 IGBs. So what we're reporting and presenting here is that a contribution would be 1.3 million, and that's that quarter share or thereabouts of the 5 million totality of overspend that's in inpatient mental health. Now that then brings us to our reported position that will be within our annual accounts of an overspend of 2.9 million. But as per our integration scheme, and as you know, we don't have the general reserves left to plug that gap, so that overspend will in effect pass back to NHS Tayside and be reported as an overspend there. So apologies that it's not all straightforward, but we've tried to be clear in our layout here so that you can see what the position is in regards to what you normally see and what we've been reporting all year on the services that we do have delegated budget for, and then a separate table that highlights how much we are contributing towards inpatient mental health, albeit we don't actually have the funding ourselves.
Wondered how the contributions were worked out, because obviously Angus won't have the same level of patients, as what there is in Dundee, for example, so it's just a straight division between the IGBs. It doesn't matter how many patients there are in each of the areas, it's just a straight division.
So at present, it's based on something that may reflect the NRAC allocation, so based on our population, etc. So not that specific population that would use the services, but just that general resource allocation share. So what the point is, we're not setting a precedent in doing this. This is not the way that we're expecting a share to be going forward. It's not a set in stone agreement at all. It's just a way of managing the 24-25 position as an interim situation until we've got that financial framework from the new model and what that will look like. And that's the model that should follow something that represents what we need as a local population. So it's not a precedent that's been set there, Maureen.
And Maureen, in terms of your question, it's me. I think I'd said this in another forum, that actually what we've seen is that overspend come down, which is a really, positive picture. And that's the first time, I think, since it was passed back to NHS Tayside from Perth and Kinross IJB in 2020. So the costs have been escalating and it's now coming down, and that's associated with a whole variety of different things about supplementary staffing, managing that, but also that we know from the reports that we've been getting here that the occupancy rate in inpatient general adult psychiatry has come down, stabilising, and they're no longer using surge capacity. So the numbers who are coming through
the inpatient services are going down when we need to keep that going. So so there's a positive sign in here, although it's still £5.7 million overspent.
Sorry, another question. I see here that we're not actually, I don't know where you're including the disabled individuals, because other than those who were disabled from either childhood or through their adult years, we are seeing an increase in a lack of mobility occurring with older adults as well. So we're really spanning every generation now quite significantly. And various people living at home in a home that was perfectly suitable originally is now no longer suitable, and therefore reasonable adjustments are required to be made to allow them to remain at home. And I'm just wondering where in the budget that's been accounted for, if we're going to have increasing numbers of people putting a demand on that budget.
So there's some differences in the way that the budget, the services that are delegated. So for adaptations, for example, for adaptations to households, for example, there's that sits in a different place. So there'll be council obligations there that still sit with the council. So it's not within our revenue budget. However, we do have an allowance in our budget, and we have done in the past, made sure that we're looking at that growing need for equipment and that level of support. But we would be working with council colleagues if we were seeing an increased pressure coming through, and that's where the planning should be around that, connected to the council for the adaptations that are required, or the future needs for housing type requirements.
Okay, and I think we'll finish with a question from me, which is in the section in general medical services. I noticed that it's agreed that we won't receive a share of the overspend with the Abbey 2C practice in Angus, which I presume is in Arbroath, but we are still taking a share of the other 2C practices across Dundee and Angus, just to confirm.
Yes, that is correct, but I would say that to an extent. So previously, it was a share of the entirety of the additional cost, whereas now it's the premium cost of that practice is no longer shared out with the three IGBs. I think probably just to simply put is the cost of the practice that would take for it to be managed to a reasonable level is shared, but the costs that are related to the practices that is in excess, so at a premium, that is no longer shared.
If there's no other questions or comments on this report, and I'm just sorry, I was just reading a comment from Mrs. Auld in the chat. I think we'll don't need to go into that just now because you do say you're conscious of time constraints. So we'll pick that item up, Mrs. Auld, after the meeting. Can we note the overall outturn for 24-25 based on financial performance to the end of March? Note the Chief Officer and senior management team have continued to work on and review actions to mitigate cost measures. Note the update on the financial recovery plan. Note the expenditure against earmarked reserves and the level of reserves carried forward into 25-26, and note the content of the Accounts Commission Finance Bulletin, IGB Finance Bulletin, summarised in the paper and reprinted in one of the appendices. Can we agree all of those? Thank you very much. Thanks very much, Chief Finance Officer, to you and the finance team. Thanks very much as well for, in particular, for bringing forward the outturn report date to the start of June. Much appreciated. Okay, we are going to bash on and get the rest of the agenda finished in 6 minutes. Item 8.1 on the agenda is a performance framework for 2024 2025, and Chris Jolly is going to introduce this report.
Thanks, Chair, for the opportunity to present this report, the purpose of which is to seek IGB approval for a performance framework which responds to the approval of the strategic plan last year, which called out the need for such a framework to be put in place. We haven't previously had an IGB approved performance framework, although we have had established process governance in place to regulate performance management reporting. This framework formalises this and puts in place a sound methodology for how we link plans to performance, identify performance measures, targets for achievement, and the audiences which receive performance information. The steps taken to get to this point include some research and analysis on the approaches taken in similar organisations across the country, including a consultation with colleagues from elsewhere in Scotland. Performance workshops were held in January, where around 100 or so people came together to help take this forward, and we undertook consultation directly with NHS Tayside and Perth and Kinross Council colleagues. The approach taken and the progress to date was presented to the Audit Performance Committee in February, and a link to the report, to that report, is included, and I'm grateful to the Audit Performance Committee for the support with this work. The next steps from here are to review existing and emerging delivery plans for adult services, older people and primary care, which will be necessary ahead of the implementation of our PK Perform system. We need to create a service user feedback tool to increase the inflow of data in respect to how people experience our services. And we will be looking to make additional progress in the use of technology to assist in the visualization of data to help us digest that and understand it to a much greater extent. And we also need to create and implement a quality management system for our data, which supports the gathering, storage, retrieval and utilisation of health and social care data, which supports sound decision making. I hope that the recommendations meet with your approval. They are to approve the framework, request updates on performance to go to the Audit Performance Committee quarterly, and request that the Audit Performance Committee also consider the ongoing implementation of this framework. Please also note that the paper raises directions for statutory partners. Happy to take questions.
Thank you very much, Mr. Jolly. Are there any questions or comments on the report, Mr.
Just for clarification, Chris, what is the direction that we're giving the NHS Tayside and the council?
Hi, so in summary, the text is NHS Tayside and Perth and Kinross Council are directed to actively engage with Perth and Kinross Integration Joint Board when developing strategies and documents of strategic importance. When they relate to or affect delegated services, this engagement must ensure that performance measures for delegated services align with both Perth and Kinross IGB performance framework and the delivery of the Integration Joint Board strategic plan.
Any more questions or comments on this report? Mr. Jolly, I had lots of questions at pre-agenda, but I'm not going to repeat any of them here for everybody's benefit. Yeah, they've been incorporated. Thanks very much then. Can we agree the recommendations as set out? I'm not going to repeat them by Mr. Jolly a minute ago. Agreed. Thank you very much. Ooh, we might do it. Oh no, we're not going to do it. Meeting is the next item on the agenda is meeting equalities duties, and this is the Chief Officer.
Thank you very much. The IJB received a report at its March meeting at which there was agreement that the HSCP, as the Health and Social Care Partnership, would bring forward a mainstreaming equalities report. This is set out at Appendix 1 and set in the context of the new strategic plan from June 24 and the underpinning joint strategic needs assessment. Further detail on how the 5 equalities outcomes from 21 to 25 were met via the IGB strategic plan is included as well, and a revised set of equality outcomes building on those already agreed in March. So you're asked to approve the mainstreaming equalities report, endorse the revised set of 7 equalities outcomes with a detailed 2-year action plan, and to request annual updates which goes beyond the legislative requirement. So in doing so, these actions will ensure that the IJB will meet its equalities duties under the Equality Act 2010. Thanks. Happy to take any questions.
Any questions or comments? Not seeing any. So if there are none, can we then note progress in relation to the outcomes achieved by the Health and Social Care Partnership in meeting our 5 agreed outcomes up until 2025, approve the mainstreaming equalities report for 25 to 29, approve a revised set of 7 equality outcomes for 25 to 29 and the associated action plan, and request annual reporting of an assessment of progress, noting that this is more frequent than the legal requirement of every 2 years. Can we? Yeah? Okay, great, thank you very much. Item 9.1 on the agenda is the... Oh, sorry, Mr. Joe.
Apologies, just a reflection on the performance framework. We perhaps ought to have had one of the recommendations to be for approval of the direction. So just in terms of the formality of that, just want to clarify that the board approved the direction.
Thanks very much. Can we therefore, for item 8.1, just formally approve the direction to NHS Tayside and Perth and Kinross Council? Agreed. Thank you very much. Item 9.1 on the agenda is our Integration Joint Board work plan and development sessions. If anybody can read this size of text, congratulations. What was I going to say about this? Oh, unless there's any questions, we'll just note this and move on. But it was just for information that we've had the completion of a number of the strategic delivery plans sort of expiring this year. So later on in the year, you will start to see more new strategic delivery plans coming up on the IJB's work plan. And we've got the list of the development sessions on the second page there, and we're programming in a number of items for the development sessions. No questions there? Item 9.2 is just to note our future meeting dates, although specifically to note that we have got the extraordinary meeting of the IJB scheduled for Friday the 20th of June at 2 o'clock in the afternoon to consider the recommendations for the CARS medical practice. So just to add that one in, make sure everybody's doubly familiar with that. And then 9.3 in the agenda is just those development session dates for the rest of 25, 26. If there's no other questions or comments or anything on those dates, thank you very much for your attendance and engagement. 3 minutes over, nearly did it. Thanks very much to all the officers who've come along and not only presented the reports, but been involved in the preparation of reports. And thanks to the team that the teams that sit behind them who've actually been doing the work of the Health and Social Care Partnership. That's this meeting of the Integration Joint Board closed.